Now,
Ladies and gentlemen,
get started. Broadcasting from the shores of the world's most beautiful beaches, this is the most talked about radio show in Bay County, the Brian Rust Morning Show. Melting down snowflakes faster than a blowtorch and doing it with a smile. Now, here's Brian Rust on News Talk at 101.
All right, welcome back to the show, hour number 3. Thank you so much for listening. Got to welcome to the show first time, Mark Mix. Mark is the president of the National Right to Work Committee, also president of the National Right to Work Legal Defense Foundation. Mark, you're a busy guy. Good morning. How are you?
I'm doing fine, Brian, and thanks for the last half hour. It was a pleasure to listen to Earl and to Tom and to you and hear some common sense. I mean, I guess we have to go to Panama Beach or Panama City to get common sense around here anymore.
Yeah, isn't that insane? I mean, it's what happened to the and I can't even call it common sense anymore. It's like, actually, I've got Patrick who calls all the time, and he calls it walking around sense, which is kind of more right, because common it is not. Oh, yeah. Anyhow, welcome to the show, Mark. Glad to have you.
I'm glad to be on with you. Yeah.
We got so much to talk about. I mean, you're with the National Right to Work Committee, and tell us a little bit about exactly what that is and what you guys do.
Yeah, the National Right to Work Committee has been around since 1955. We were formed and organized by 5 railway employees that were forced to pay union dues in order to keep their jobs on the railroad. And since 1955, the committee has been defending the ability for workers to be free from forced unionism. Unfortunately, Brian, federal law, and this won't surprise you or Earl, but federal law going back to 1933 exactly, 1935, in the Roosevelt administration, basically set a policy, a federal policy that covers all private sector workers in the country, that says they could be fired from their job for failure to pay union dues or fees to a private organization. And while that's wrong, inherently wrong, it's something from a public policy standpoint that affects a lot of the institutions in America, and including the National Guard, which I hope we'll talk about a little bit. But
absolutely.
The committee is basically defending right-to-work laws. There are 27 states that have right-to-work laws, including Florida, and these laws don't stop anyone from joining a union, participating in a union, or giving union officials their entire paycheck if they choose to do so. But these right-to-work laws in the 27 states, including Florida, just don't complicate. They will not accept the idea that you lose your job. If you're the best worker, the worst worker, the medium worker, whatever kind of worker you are, white, black, yellow, whatever it is, if you don't pay a private organization a certain amount of money per month, you lose your job. We're against that. The right to work laws protect workers' individual freedom and individual liberty. The Legal Defense Foundation it's been around since 1968. We provide free legal aid to employees across the nation whose rights have been violated by these forced unionism agreements. We've argued 18 cases in the United States Supreme Court. The most recent victory was back in June of 2018, where we argued a case that protects all government employees all across the country from being forced to pay dues or fees to a government union. So we have a national right to work law for government employees across the country, but there's still more work to be done, Brian.
Yeah, obviously there is. And you know, the thing about unions that I think some people don't get is how much it's changed. I mean, back in the day when unions really first came around, it was really to protect the safety of the employees. You know, back in the robber baron days, when, you know, work conditions were horrible and, you know, a workplace death was a common thing, or workplace injury was a common thing, and the way that they were treated with funding. Today, that just doesn't seem to be the situation. It's like all it is it's a political, you know, arm of some sort that, you know, just makes it so that you're forced to pay them. And it kind of seems like an extortion almost. And you don't see very many unions doing that much good for their employees, other than giving them more money than they probably need. And, you know, you don't see anything good for the general public. I mean, minus maybe a couple of them, like the Airline Pilots Association, the only one that I can think of that has really done good that the people have gotten from it.
Well, and you're absolutely right. Your kind of historical context is right. I mean, back then in the late 1800s, early 1900s, you know, people make the case all the time there was a place for unionism, and there was. But interestingly enough, Brian, unions were voluntary back then. They were completely voluntary, and they were governed by state laws as opposed to a federal one-size-fits-all federal policy. It wasn't until the late 1920s when union officials of the AFL decided they were going to go to Washington and get government to grant them this extreme power to have workers fired for failure to tender dues or fees to a private organization. And actually, in 1924, in his final speech to the AFL delegates, Samuel Gompers, known as the father of the American labor movement, gave his final speech, And he said this. He said, the workers of America adhere to voluntary institutions. Anything else is a menace to their rights and will destroy that which brought together through voluntarism is inherently stronger than anything that can be cobbled together through compulsion and force. And what he meant was, when you become wards of the government action, you've got to start playing politics. And there is no bigger player in politics across the nation, Brian, and you know this, than organized labor. I mean, they are all in with one party, and they spend, they raise and spend about $20 billion a year. I know a billion doesn't sound like much anymore.
Not really.
But they also spend about $2 billion every 2 years on federal elections alone. I mean, this is a big political campaign, a big political operation, as you articulated.
Yeah, it really has gone completely political, and I think it's done more damage to this country than it's actually done any good. I mean, look, we're now, and this is one of the things that I bring up all the time about how I can't stand portions of the unions, like the auto workers union. Here we got guys that are on the assembly line that are making $45, $50 an hour to literally just take one part and a power drill and go, and that's all they do all day long. Just, and they move on to the next car, and that's it. And now we, the people, are paying, $60,000, $70,000 for a car, and those unions are pushing, Democrat, progressive candidates, and it's messing the entire country up. So it just pulls your hair out a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, well, but particularly the UAW, and obviously there's lots of other issues that are involved in that. But the bigger issue with the United Auto Workers Union is the fact that 14 of their top executives are in jail right now for corruption and for racketeering and extortion. And two previous presidents of the international UAW are in jail right now. And, they went to Palm Springs and had villas for 6 months and golf and $400 bottles of champagne and expensive cigars. And they did this all on the backs of rank-and-file workers who they claim to represent.
Right.
And when those rank-and-file workers tried to go back and file a class action lawsuit against them, well, you have no standing to file a case against your union officials, which is just outrageous.
It really, truly is. It's crazy to watch the stuff that we deal with the corruption that happens. And of course, like you said, how many of them are in jail now? I mean, come on. It's insanity. Yeah. But let's talk about the National Guard thing. This got me riled up earlier today, to say the least. What's the details on this whole National Guard unionized thing?
Well, the first thing you have to do is say, who benefits from this? And who benefits from this is actually the union officials in the state of Connecticut, the AFSCME, the American Federation of State, County, Municipal Employees, the American Federation of Government Employees, these public sector unions, these government sector unions that want to have more control over our government. And so what's happened here is the Yale Law School, their clinic, a bunch of law students there with the help of a private sector attorney, have come up with this idea that the Department of Justice here in Washington is just going to turn their heads and look the other way, saying that when these National Guardsmen are on state active duty, they're not covered by the federal code that makes it criminal for them to be involved in unionization and have union negotiations. So what they're saying is that when they're under state active duty, they should be able to be unionized. And your point in the last segment, you said, they got to call the union steward before they can start the bulldozer up to clear a highway or rescue someone from the rooftops in a flood. They want a bargain. So if it's under federal duty, it would be illegal under federal law. But when they're under state active duty, it would be perfectly fine to have a union bargaining for conditions of employment for National Guardsmen. And the secret to all that, Brian, is that under Connecticut law, union officials, even though we won a case that says no government employee can be forced to pay union dues, the union gets special privileges in getting people into the union and saying, hey, you got to be a member of the union and you got to sign this card. And that card means that we get dues taken directly out of your National Guard pay, or your Connecticut National Guard state activity paycheck. And but if you're working on federal stuff, you just got to listen to the federal people in charge and you got to do what they say. But if we're on state activity, then we'll have to negotiate over anything that the state calls you to do in an emergency or if you're on active duty. It's crazy. It's crazy.
Just my head hurts. Today's entire show has made my head hurt. I mean, with the level of stupid that is going on in this world. And of course, what benefit does that have for the people of Connecticut? I mean, obviously the union's going to make their money and everything, but what is going to be the benefit for the people of Connecticut? And heaven forbid that other states, also pick up on that same thing.
Well, you obviously know that, one of the reasons, and you mentioned it earlier, one of the reasons for unionization is the outsized balance of the employer over the worker. And so the most difficult workplace in America must be the National Guard or the state National Guard headquarters in Connecticut, because, gosh, we can't fix the injustices that occur in the workplace without a union stepping in between, a commander of the National Guard and the members who've signed up, the voluntary members who've signed up for the National Guard. I mean, it's ridiculous. The argument's ridiculous, and it's just an idea of getting more power and more money. And it really boils down to that. I mean, the idea that, they use this, we're working with other state employees who can negotiate their terms and conditions of employment. And, it's the dignity and the respect that we deserve. And one of the ways you get dignity and respect is you give a third party, a private sector third party, a voice in between taxpayers, elected officials, and their government. I mean, it doesn't make any sense, and it's wrong. I mean, even Franklin Roosevelt, Brian, was against the unionization of government employees. And the idea that if they join a union, if they want to join a union, that's one thing. But forcing the state or forcing a locality to negotiate with a private organization for terms and conditions of how taxpayers' money is spent, that's where Roosevelt immediately said, look, we can't do that. That's ridiculous. It's not the same as the private sector. And obviously the power that union officials have in the private sector is a derivative of federal law. But at the state level, when you think about government employment, I mean, unions don't belong there. Negotiations with a private organization and giving them a position in between voters and elected officials is not the right policy. And it hasn't worked for California or Connecticut or New Jersey or New York. It hasn't worked for those states because it's basically put them in teetering on the edge of financial disaster. And if it hadn't been for the American Rescue Plan that bailed out the worst managed states in the country and put them back on a tentatively financial basis, sustainable basis for at least the next 2 years or so, those states would have already, probably gone over the edge, or at least one or two of them.
Yeah. I mean, being somebody from New England, I know what goes on in the state of Connecticut. And honestly, the National Guard doesn't do a whole lot. I mean, like once every 10 years or 15 years or so, the Connecticut River flows a little bit more than it normally would. Sometimes there's a little bit of a heavier snowstorm than normal, but I can't figure out a legitimate purpose for, I mean, other than, obviously getting the money for the union, why you would need to have a union as a guardsman in the state of Connecticut. I mean, it's not like they're off, down here in Florida where we have a hurricane and they got to go in and rescue people and, all that type of stuff. But it's just insane. I mean, what's gone wrong with this world? And that's my biggest question for the year. What's gone wrong?
Yeah. Well, I know Earl's got an answer for that, and Tom has an answer for that, and I tend to stay pretty focused on the fact that it's about individual power that's granted to special interest, and that's what union officials have turned out to be. They're a special interest, and they are wards of government action, and so that's why they have to play politics in such a major way. That's why they lose sight of what happens on the shop floor and are more interested in what happens in Tallahassee or Albany or Washington, D.C. or Sacramento. And it's really a derivative of the fact that they've got, in order to survive, they've got to be involved in politics because they can't sell their products to workers anymore. I mean, 6.1% of the private sector workforce is unionized in America, but yet if you listen to the Biden administration, nothing gets done unless it's done under a union monopoly bargaining contract. And everything that this president's doing right now, empowering union officials, giving them more taxpayer money, increasing the cost of construction projects that have government funds in them by 10, 20, 30% because he won't let non-union contracting companies bid on jobs that have federal money or any project that's over $35 million. We know from experience, and no one can debate this or argue with it, when you limit the number of people that can compete, that could do a job, you get increased cost. And certainly when union officials are the only ones that can bid on a construction project or a company with a union contract, that increases the price to the taxpayers. But that doesn't seem to matter to Joe Biden and this administration because what they're interested in is political power, and they know that their most reliable political ally are not rank-and-file workers anymore because rank-and-file workers have changed their behavior. It's the union officials that control, unfortunately, most of the workers in the country.
Yeah, that is crazy. What is the danger for America as a whole to have all of this unionization?
Well, in the private sector, like I said, there's only 6.1%, but you have this kind of finger on the scale when it comes to this administration. In the public sector, I think we've seen the results of it already. I mean, you think of Scott Walker back in 2011 and Act 10 up there.
Yep.
I mean, unions, you thought the world was going to end, that nothing was going to happen, but yet Wisconsin is on a sound financial footing. Even the county executives in Milwaukee that were against Walker at every minute of trying to reform the bargaining process, and they could have gone farther. They didn't eliminate bargaining. They eliminated what could be bargained for, but the state immediately, the city of Milwaukee was, on better financial footing, and they saved I forget what the numbers is, like $3 billion.
Yeah, it was a ridiculous amount of money
cost by having competition. So that's the problem, and they're growing in government, and that's the scary part of forced unionization.
Our government's a mess anyhow. It needs to be reduced, to say the least. We're chatting with Martin Mix, and Mark, your actually writings are all over the place too. I know that you often do a bunch of articles with a bunch of really good newspapers around the country. Some of the ones that I looked at, are not the far left ones, and we got some newspapers here. Maybe we'll have to try and get your articles in there. You're doing some great work up there with the organization, the National Right to Work Committee, and also the National Right to Work Legal Defense Foundation. Are we going to be okay in the future? That's the question. When it comes to the unions in our government and all this corruption.
We are. There's guys like Earl and Tom out there with walking around sense, and you're making people. One thing we have to do is let people know what's happening. They're paying attention more. We just got to continue to do that. You're part of that. Hopefully, our work is part of that. I know Earl and Tom are part of that. So you just keep up what you're doing, and we'll be okay. We've been in tough times before, but this idea of this experiment in self-government has worked, and it will continue to work. Although there are forces out there that are trying to tear it apart and tear it down. Yeah,
that there are. Mark, thank you so much for coming on. I do appreciate it. We'll have to have you back on someday. Mark Mix, National Right to Work. I've got your Facebook page shared with us on our Facebook page, so you can know and check that out if you want more information. Mark, thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Brian.
Absolutely. Have a fantastic day. We'll talk with you soon. And we got to take a quick little break.